Part 48. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 471. On the 5th day of the winter month, 3 days after the birthday banquet of King Wu, the small bridges and flowing waters in Hangzhou were covered with a layer of silver again. During the 3 days, Su Buling did not continue to investigate the movements of King Wu's mansion. Every day, he took Lu Hongluan and Xiao Qi to visit the major scenic spots in Hangzhou. By the way, he picked some small gifts for the girls at home, such as poetry collections, rouge, jewelry, etc., and did not forget to bring some Hangzhou specialties to Xiao Manzi. The light snow fell densely between the eaves of the buildings. On the lakeside street full of the charm of the water town, Su Buling was wearing a white robe like snow, holding an oil paper umbrella, and picking various novel items on the street. Nightingale wore a black jacket, and some snowflakes fell on her hip-length braids. Her slender body was holding a pile of wooden boxes. She could not even see the road clearly, and had to tilt her head hard to avoid walking into the West Lake. Nightingale's big eyes, full of spirit, showed a rare sense of grievance. Looking at Su Buling with his hands empty, she whispered, "Sir, I know I was wrong." "What was wrong?" "Everything was wrong." No sincerity. At that time, Madame Lu said she wanted to go in and take a look. You know Madame's temper. If I don't let her in, she will definitely be suspicious. Then you will suffer. It's better now. Su Buling was a little helpless and rubbed his old waist, which was still a little painful. What's good? You ignored me for 2 days. If you encounter such a thing in the future, remember to cough. I know, sir. Nightingale walked under Su Buling's umbrella and showed a sweet smile. Su Buling couldn't do anything about this little girl. He shook his head gently, raised his hand to take a few wooden boxes, and continued walking along the lakeside street. 2 days ago, he fought with his father-in-law Zulu and sank a pleasure boat. Although he did not fall into a hard fight, Su Buling was obviously beaten one-sidedly. It was also the first time that he realized that he still had room for improvement. Looking at the beautiful snowy lake, Su Buling thought for a while and said softly, "Nightingale, you read books in there. Have you ever learned about the kung fu of floating on water?" Talking about martial arts, Nightingale suddenly became interested. It was rare for a young master to ask for advice. After thinking about it, he answered seriously. The kung fu of floating on water is more famous, including Wudan's Tianzong and Buddhism's Yi Wei Jiang, etc. They are all advanced martial arts of the inner family. Among them, the best ones are Jia Gong Gong in the palace, Wudan killing god Chendaizai, and Long Hushan Zhang Buhan. There was also a wild Taoist Wu Yu in the past. It is said that he could run faster than Chendaizai, but he only knows Qinggong. The rest is average. I don't know where he went. Anyway, there are few people who are famous for this. Su Buling nodded gently. 80% of the martial artists in the Jianghu follow the external martial arts. Internal martial arts are mysterious and difficult to master. There are few masters who can teach, and naturally fewer people learn. The crane capture hand and white snake spits tongue he used are all internal martial arts moves, but he was too brave and aggressive in the past, and he only learned killing moves, and looked down on other moves, and he really didn't study them carefully. After listening to Nightingale's detailed explanation, Su Buling asked, "Do you know it?" Nightingale blinked her big eyes, showing a little pride. "I know everything you know, and I know everything you don't know. But the skill of floating on the water is flashy and impractical. It hurts your body to force yourself to hold your breath for too long, and you may not swim as fast as a master. The only advantage is that you don't get your clothes wet. Why do you learn this?" Su Buling coughed lightly, looked around a few times, and whispered, "It's all about being handsome. Why bother so much? Find a place to try it." Nightingale suddenly realized, holding a pile of wooden boxes, and Su Buling came to a secluded place by the lake. There were willow forests all around, and it was so cold that no tourists came. Only a few pleasure boats could be seen from afar on the lake. The two put down their things, and the little nightingale clapped her hands, gathered her skirt and tied it around her waist, then took a long breath, and then walked lightly but quickly, rushing directly out of the shore and onto the lake. Tap, tap, tap. The embroidered shoes made circles of ripples on the water, the big braids fluttered in the wind in the snowflakes, and the thin figure ran a big circle on the calm lake outside the willow forest in the blink of an eye, without falling into the water. The scene was both chic and beautiful. Su Buling stood with his hands behind his back holding an oil paper umbrella. After looking carefully for a moment, he nodded slightly, as if he had realized something. Nightingale returned to the shore quickly. Because treading water requires one to do it all at once, it obviously took a lot of effort. Her little face was red with a few beads of sweat, and she smiled like she was offering a treasure. "Sir, how is it?" "Not bad, not bad." Su Buling nodded and praised a few words, put down the oil paper umbrella, and then raised his hand to take a breath. Nightingale glanced at it, stepped back a few steps, and used the oil paper umbrella to block himself and the wooden box. Bang! After a loud bang, two pits were left where Su Buling stood. His figure turned into a white rainbow and soared into the sky. The cold wind tore at his white robe. After falling on the lake and symbolically stepping on it a few times, he crashed into the lake, raising a splash of more than 2 feet high. A short hour later, in the Xiao family's courtyard, Su Buling sat on the soft couch next to the brass heater, wrapped in a blanket, with a slightly embarrassed expression. Lu Hongluan stood behind Su Buling with a towel, wiping his long hair, and said in a puzzled manner, "Ling why did you go swimming in the lake in the middle of winter? Did someone fall into the water and you went to help?" Su Buling coughed lightly, raised his hand to shoo away Nightingale who was trying not to laugh, and explained softly, "Well, I finally came to Hangzhou, and I don't know when I will come next time. It would be a pity if I don't swim in the West Lake." "Really?" Mrs. Lu knew that Su Buling's martial arts skills were almost unrivaled and there was no way he would slip and fall into the water, so she could only believe this explanation. He frowned and said, "The dignified prince of the feudal lord went to take a wild bath and was laughed at to death if people saw him. This will not be allowed in the future. Apart from other things, what should I do if I catch a cold?" "I know." Su Bulenling's face showed a rare hint of frustration. He was born with strong muscles and strong bones, and he was as good as a tiger when he went to the outside world. However, when practicing this skill that relies on internal strength and cleverness, it is easy to lose control of his strength and exert too much force. It is just like an old woman wearing armor or a general doing embroidery. It is very awkward. However, the talent for practicing martial arts is here. You can master it after practicing about 10 times. After staying in the room for a while, Xiao Qi's guard suddenly ran in and said that Prince Wu's mansion had sent someone to bring the jade back. Su Buring knew that King Wu must have finished drawing the map, and he would probably leave for Bodhi Island soon to look for something very important. After changing his clothes, he got up and went to the living room. He thought it would be Song Yulu or Han Xianchu who came to return the jade, but he didn't expect that the person sitting in the living room waiting was a middle-aged Confucian scholar in a scholar's robe. The one who chased him on the lake. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 472. The wind and snow were blowing outside the eaves, and Li Hansheng, who was dressed in a scholar's robe, sat on a chair with a calm expression, looking at the falling snowflakes outside the living room. Cold begets cold begets. The name Li Hansheng is now frightening to countless wolf guards and Jianghu people. But when his parents chose this name, it was just because poor people were not particular about it, so those born in winter were called Hans Hung. While waiting for Su Buletinling to come out, Li Hans Hung looked at the snowflakes outside and recalled the past 40 years. The first time he saw snow in his life was in a small village in a remote area. His family was living in poverty and not having enough to eat. His parents lived on a shoestring and sent him to the only private school in the small county. On that snowy day, he sat in the private school. When I was shivering from the cold, I remembered the master's words. Rich families don't need to buy fertile land, there are thousands of grains of millet in books. You don't need to build a high-rise building to live peacefully. There is a golden house in the book. The meaning is very simple. As long as you study hard, you can have enough to eat and live in an airtight house. Li Hans Hung was not very smart, but he worked very hard. He passed the county and college examinations at a young age and was admitted as a scholar. He was somewhat famous in the countryside. Unfortunately, after a famine, there was only one scholar left. Identity, nothing else around me. The second time it snowed, we went to Sun's store in Chang'an City. At that time, he was less than 20 years old, and he waited again and again for the next spring, and then failed and started all over again. All the money I brought was gone, my calligraphy and paintings could not be sold, and I was sitting in the Bluestone Alley about to starve to death. A middle-aged man passed by with 2 bottles of wine and said, "Want to warm up in the shop?" He was full of bookishness at the time, and replied, "I will die of hunger without eating the food that comes to me, and I will die of thirst without drinking the water from the stolen spring." The shopkeeper scolded him, "Who the hell gave you this for free? You have to pay back the favor." After that, he became a shop assistant in Sun's shop, selling wine during the day and studying at night. He still failed in the imperial examination and owed more and more favors, but fortunately he did not starve to death on the streets. The days passed quickly afterwards, with beautiful women in the company, playing in the world, getting married, and having a daughter, and a happy family. Then somehow, another snowy day arrived, and he stood in front of a small grave, with the ruined cottage behind him. He was alone again, just like the first time he set foot on the road to Beijing with a package on his back. The future was unclear and there was a desolation behind him. He can't remember clearly after that. Maybe he doesn't want to remember, or he's already dead. The things he thinks and does are just like a walking zombie trying to make up for the past. He doesn't know how long it will last, maybe until someday when I can close my eyes. Tread. Footsteps sounded from outside the door, and Su Buling appeared at the door. There was a bit of surprise in his eyes, and he raised his hand and said, "Your Excellency." Li Hans Hung regained his composure and said calmly, "Prince Su, we met on the second day of winter." Su Buletinling was afraid that he was a close acquaintance of King Wu. He originally wanted to pretend that he didn't know him. He smiled softly when he heard this. He raised his hand to ask the maid who was bringing tea and water to step back. He entered the living room alone and sat on the main seat. "Next," he said with a smile. "Your Excellency, you are not Li Hans Hung, are you?" Li Hans Hung took out the jade article from his sleeve and placed it on the tea table. "I thought you had seen it already." Su Buling had such a guess, but he couldn't confirm it. Seeing that this handsome middle-aged scholar was really Ning Qingyi's biological father, his eyes looked a little complicated. In Su Buling's impression, Li Hanzhen's evaluation was not very good. He abandoned his wife and daughter and was ruthless in his methods. He was nicknamed the Poison Man by the Criminal Investigation Department. He was a world away from the sword master Zulu. Moreover, Ning Qingyi hated her father so much that he only wanted to be an official and eventually separated his wife and children. It was obviously not advisable to seek relatives on the spot, and it was inappropriate to treat him coldly. For a while, he didn't know how to treat him. It turns out to be Master Li. I have admired his name for a long time. It's a pleasure to meet you. Li Hans Hung had no reaction to this compliment and just said softly, I came here just to advise you not to interfere in King Wu's affairs. If you can hand over the jade quickly and eavesdrop outside the observation deck, you must have got a lot of information. Stop it and go back and wait and see what happens. It's best to find out what's going on, it's not good for you or me. Seeing Li Hanzhong being so frank, Su Buling smiled softly. My Su family is full of loyal people. After learning about this kind of thing, if I don't get to the bottom of it, I'm sorry to the Song family, Your Excellency, at least tell me the truth. Li Hanzhong shook his head. You entered too early, there is no benefit at all, only bad things. You thought that jumping out of Chang'an's chessboard meant that the sea was vast, but you didn't know that you had already fallen into another chessboard. That old master in Yuelu Mountain, you only have chess pieces in your hand, and you never treat people as human beings. If you make a wrong move, you will end up worse than Songji. If you quit now and wait for the time, you will gain more things at the end. Su Buling frowned slightly, thought about these words for a moment, and said softly. What chess is that old gentleman playing? The world will be united if it is divided for a long time. He seeks to unify the world. It doesn't matter who becomes the emperor. You are valued now just because you have the best chance now. Just like Songji in the past, once he loses power, he will become an outcast on the spot. Do you think you have married him? His granddaughter, how can he favor you even more? Su Buling heard this and chuckled. If you come here to use counterintuitive tactics to sow discord, please come back. Li Hanzhong smiled lightly. You have to walk your own path. It's useless to talk more. You can take care of yourself. After saying that, he stood up and walked out the door. Su Buling looked at Li Hanzhong's back, thought for a moment, and said softly. Ning Qingyi is with me, don't you know, or don't want to ask? Li Hanzhong paused, looked up at the snow outside, and said nothing. He walked out of the living room and disappeared in the courtyard in a flash. Su Buling didn't see what Li Hanzhong was thinking, so he could only shake his head and sigh. After Li Hanzhong left, Su Buling sat on the armchair, rubbing his fingers on the teacup, frowning and thinking for a moment. In fact, he also saw that Grandpa Fuebao had a very high vision, jumping out of the three realms and not in the five elements, and his words and deeds were not mixed with any emotion, so that when he spoke, he felt a little bit of walking on thin ice. No matter what purpose Li Hanzhong's words were for, they obviously made some sense. If Grandpa Fuebao only had the world in his eyes, then he and Songji were just chess pieces on the chessboard, strong and weak, supporting the strong to eat the weak, just like raising a gu, and finally leaving only one master of the world. He has a chance of success now, so resources will be tilted to him, but if someone more suitable than him appears one day, he may become a stepping stone for others. However, Fuebao's grandfather is obviously not a big villain, but he stands too high and thinks differently from them. If we have to find an adjective, it is probably only those who achieve great things do not care about trivial matters. Since the day when Songji put down the dragon lock gu and raised the butcher knife, Su Wang Suyu has drawn a clear line with the Song family from the bottom of his heart. For the future and the stability of future generations, there will be a day of fighting sooner or later. Su Buling doesn't like fighting, but this kind of thing is just like being in the rivers and lakes and being unable to control oneself. It is not something that can be controlled by personal thoughts. If you don't move when the time comes, you will be crowned with a yellow robe. If you move when the time is not right, it will be a waste of time. So in response to Fuebao's grandfather's inquiry, Su Buling replied. Don't be greedy when facing wealth, and don't be evasive when facing difficulties. After learning about these messy news, Su Buling had a premonition that the world was going to be in chaos, but before the big waves started, it was impossible to tell which wind was coming from. Su Buling looked at the calm Hangzhou city outside the living room, and after thinking for a long time, he just sighed softly. In any case, he had to go back to Huainan first and settle his wives. He couldn't stay in Jiangnan and watch the world in chaos. Then he wouldn't be able to go back. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 473. In the snowy winter, Ning Qingyi took the famous sword Shang Chun left behind by her mother, bought a pot of the famous local Huihe brewing from an old shop in Huainan City, and came to the stone pavilion by the Huihe River. In the stone pavilion, Zhongli Chuchu is covered with red gauze, standing tall and graceful, looking at the glacier and snow with her green eyes, looking at the glaciers and snow in a daze. Ning Qingyi took a small drink and looked at it from a distance for a few times before walking into the stone pavilion built by an unknown ancestor of the Xiao family and said softly, "Miss Chuchu." Zhongli Chuchu heard the sound and turned around, his eyes slightly surprised and weird. After hesitating for a moment, he showed his usual approachable smile. "Xiaoning, why are you here?" It's just that this smile, in Ning Qingyi's eyes, no longer has the cheerfulness of the past, sons and daughters of the world, happy grudges. She sat on the bench in the stone pavilion, put the wine bottle at hand, and raised her hand to brush the hair around her ears. "Chu-chu, do you and I count as friends?" Zhongli Chuchu blinked his emerald-like eyes and sat down next to him. Perhaps because he felt that Ning Qingyi's eyes were too sharp and hard to look at directly, he averted his eyes and smiled. "We are naturally friends. The fight between masters has nothing to do with us, I will advise master." Ning Qingyi carefully observed Zhongli Chuchu's expression, and the invisible barrier still existed. She, who was always outspoken, picked up the porcelain wine bottle beside her and handed it to Zhongli Chuchu. "I am a straightforward person. If I offend you, I can speak up. I can accept other people's opinions and make corrections, but I don't like others to misunderstand me." "Well." Zhongli Chuchu took the wine bottle, his eyes flickered, and he pursed his lips and chuckled. Ning Qingyi definitely didn't offend her, but after knowing the relationship between Ning Qingyi and Su Buling, she felt weird. Ning Qingyi would be furious if she said that kind of thing, and she couldn't speak. She could only shake her head. "Miss Ning is serious. I didn't misunderstand you." "Well, how should I put it?" Ning Qingyi smiled calmly. "Do you feel dissatisfied with Su Buling's favor for me?" Zhongli Chuchu sat up a little straighter. Of course she didn't have this idea, but it was indeed the purpose of her getting closer to Su Buling, and Ning Qingyi did that to Su Buling overtly and covertly. On the surface, Bai Lianhua pretended to be otherworldly and deceived her. I must be dissatisfied. How could it be possible? Well, Qingyi, you said before that Mr. Su was glib and covetous of your beauty as soon as he met you. Ning Qingyi naturally had a clear conscience about this and nodded. "Yes, he is indeed very enthusiastic about me and dares to say anything. But he and I have nothing to do, they are just friends who met by chance. But as far as I know, Mr. Su is aloof and indifferent to outsiders. How could he treat you alone?" When Ning Qingyi heard this, she understood that Zhongli Chuchu had alienated her out of jealousy. She shook her head and stood up. "You have to find the reason for this in yourself. Su Buring is very smart and can tell what a person's character is. If you think about competing with others all day long, it won't be surprising if he treats you coldly." As soon as he finished speaking, he left the stone pavilion and drifted away. Hey dash. Zhongli Chuchu suddenly became unhappy and thought to himself, in private, "You relied on doing things with Mr. Su to win Mr. Su's favor, but on the surface you said there was something wrong with my character, which made Mr. Su treat me coldly. No matter what I do, I don't use my body to seduce men." Zhongli Chuchu was sitting in the stone pavilion, looking at the porcelain white wine bottle in his hand, his eyes showing a hint of dissatisfaction. After frowning and thinking for a moment, he got up and returned to Xiajiazhuang, arriving outside Xiao Xiang'er's house. The winter is very cold. In the garden of the huge house, exotic flowers and stones are covered with snow quilts. The carved doors and windows of the central wing are closed tightly. Under the eaves are hung redwood signs recording the weather and dried medicinal herbs. Zhongli Chuchu quickly came to the eaves and took a look from the window. Incense was lingering in the wing, and a purple gold copper stove was placed next to the small mahogany table. The porcelain plates on the table contained rare medicinal materials such as wild ginseng and tiger bones. Two women with the same bright appearance but completely different temperaments sat sideways on the soft carpet. Zhongli Jiju grinned at it carefully with a medicine pestle. Xiao Xiang'er took scissors and carefully cut out a piece of black mink velvet, which was not very long and shaped like a tail, but she didn't know what it was used for. Zhongli Jiju was deeply involved in medicine, but knew very little about other heretics. Maybe he was a little tired of grinding medicine, so his eyes moved to Xiao Xiang'er's hand, who was concentrating on it, and asked curiously, "Xian'er, what is this piece of mink velvet used for? It's too small around the neck, and it doesn't seem to fit on the hand. Could it be that I'm ignorant?" Xiao Xiang'er's eyes were as calm as ever. The tail was not connected to the cork, and it had no effect. She just explained softly, "The decorations on the clothes will be given to my sister as gifts after she and Su Buling get married." Oh. Zhongli Jiju didn't seem to understand, but she thought it was a unique wedding custom in Jiangnan, just like the skirt knives and silver ornaments in South Vietnam, so she replied casually, "Xian'er is really ingenious, give it to me anytime, prepare one in case you need it later." Xiao Xiang'er raised her eyes, blinked, and nodded seriously. Zhongli Jiju thanked her, and was about to chat with Su Buling, who was about to come back, and ask Xiao Xiang'er to blow her pillow. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Zhongli Chuchu standing outside the window, turned around and said with a smile, "Chuchu, why are you here? Didn't you go out to enjoy the snow with Miss Song?" Zhongli Chuchu was only 17 or 18, considered a junior. She was a little nervous facing Su Buling's doting wife. She did not enter the room, but just hooked up. "Master, I have something to ask you." "Oh." Zhongli Jiju nodded with a smile, put down the medicinal materials he was grinding, stood up, patted his long skirt, and came outside the room. Zhongli Chuchu took the master to the corner of the veranda of the back house, hesitated for a moment, and said softly, "Master, I want to make friends with Mr. Su. You asked me to learn from Ningqing Yi, but after getting to know me in the past few days, it's not what you and I thought. Mr. Su is relatively indifferent to everyone, and he is the same to you and me. The same goes for Miss Song. It's not that she is treated differently at all, but her personality is like this." Zhongli Jiju did feel like that in the days when she met Su Buling. Nodded. "Well, what next?" Zhongli Chuchu looked around a few times and said softly. Mr. Su was very polite to Ningqing Yi, and even pursued him regardless of his status, while Ningqing Yi treated him coldly. At first, I thought there was something special about Ningqing Yi, but now it seems that it is nothing more than that. Zhongli Jiju was confused when he heard this, and frowned. "What? Isn't this child King Yi always like this? Is it possible that there are other ulterior things?" Zhongli nodded Chuchu, and whispered in Master's ear, "I only found out after hearing Miss Song talk about it. It turns out that the reason why young Master Su favors Ningqing Yi is because Ningqing Yi has been with young Master Su for a long time." Zhongli Jiju turned his cheek and glanced at his apprentice in disbelief to make sure she was not joking. Zhongli Chuchu knew that the master didn't believe it, and she didn't believe it either, but Song Yufu seeing was believing, and it couldn't be a lie. Now he said seriously, "It's absolutely true. It's because of this that Mr. Su is very special to Ningqing Yi. It's not because Ningqing Yi is different." I was deceived by Ning Qingyi's cold appearance. Fortunately, I have been imitating her for a long time. It's completely misleading. Zhongli Jiju had strange eyes. She had seen Ning Qingyi when she was a child. He had a cold and straightforward personality, and she had even tried to trick him into becoming his apprentice. I didn't expect that the cold little girl back then would grow up to be so playful. Seeing his apprentice's thoughts, Zhongli Jiju pondered for a moment. Chu Chu, do you like Su Buling? When Zhongli Chu heard this, her face turned red and she gave Zhongli Jiju an angry look. Master, what are you talking about? I just want to be friends with Mr. Su, unlike Ning Qingyi. Zhongli Jiju hugged her chest and leaned against the red pillar of the veranda. She frowned and said, since you just want to be friends, what do you care about Ning Qingyi? She is a man and a concubine, and it has nothing to do with you. Zhongli Chu pursed her lips, sat down in front of Zhongli Jiju, and said slightly dissatisfied, she fooled me, making me think that Mr. Su didn't like me, and caused so many things. And she even said something about me today. Come on, it's my own fault that Mr. Su is cold to me. What's wrong with me? I don't use my body to please men, right? If I lower my status and seduce Mr. Su, will she still be able to talk? Zhongli Jiju looked at his grown-up apprentice, hesitated, and sighed softly. Chu Chu, you have to make your own decision about this kind of thing. As a master, if my idea goes wrong, you will definitely blame me in the future. Zhongli Chu sat in the veranda and struggled for a moment, then thought, Master, I don't know how to do it. Zhongli Jiju sighed, thought about it for a moment, and said softly. I've been talking for a long time. I just want Su Buling to treat you differently. After all, you are the 8th leader of the modern generation. You have all your money here. Dress up a little and wear less. I've tried it before. Well, it was autumn, it wasn't cold, so I didn't wear enough clothes. Oh. Zhongli Jiju pursed her lips. She wanted to say something, but she thought that if she didn't get admitted to the university, she would become enemies if she stayed in the university. So she sighed softly, then wear less clothes. Men don't have it, don't be lewd. As long as you are tempted, no matter how cold-hearted a man is, he will show you his attentiveness. Zhongli Chu tightened her tight skirt and hesitated slightly. Master, I just want to be normal friends and confidants with Mr. Su. It's not, I don't want that. Zhongli Jiju shook his head. You have to make up your own mind about this kind of thing. Master, I have never hugged a man, and I have no friends. If you ask me, it is the same as asking a blind man. Zhongli frowned and hesitated for a long time, then slowly nodded and replied. Let me try. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 474. The wind and river became colder and colder. Su Buling stood at the window of the building and looked at the 1,000 acres of snow-covered farmland along the Huihe River. The octagonal archway given by the emperor of an unknown dynasty appeared at the end of his field of vision. We turned back from Hangzhou to Huainan without stopping along the way, and it didn't take long. Xiaoqi had already agreed to marry Su Buling, and she was forced to talk to him under the quilt. There was nothing she could do if she didn't agree. Now that she returned to Zhijiazhuang, she summoned the clan elders to discuss the handover. If there were no accidents, she would be able to set off soon. But whether he could leave peacefully like this, Su Buling was still not sure. The storm is coming, and big waves are about to rise. If he, the eldest son of the vassal king with a large army and a powerful horse, could really go back and get married as Li Hanzhong said, that would be really abnormal. He couldn't avoid what was coming, and Su Buling didn't pay attention to these impenetrable matters. He took Lu Hongluan and Xiaoqi step by step and disembarked from the ship at the pier, and went to the in-laws' house to formally negotiate various matters regarding the marriage. It was winter, and there were fewer boats on the pier. Lifu, wearing a thick cotton-padded jacket, was walking around the market. A large number of girls were waiting on the shore, which looked quite spectacular at first glance. Among them, the most excited ones were Zhu Manzi and Song Yufu. The two girls stood on tiptoes and raised their heads in anticipation. When they saw Su Buling appearing on the deck, their eyes could not contain the joy. Song Yufu was a bit shy, her brows were bashful, she put her hands on her waist and pursed her lips, as if she wanted to say something, but was embarrassed. Zhu Manzi has a cheerful personality and has been hanging out in the world all year round. He is not as coquettish as the scholarly lady. He waved at the shore and said with a smile, "Master Su. Look here." Su Buling raised his hand and waved, showing a bright smile. When Lu Hongluan saw so many warblers picking up the boat, her mature face showed a bit of embarrassment, and she said softly, "Ling you should be more careful in the future. After all, we are in the Xiao family, and we are still here to propose marriage. No driving you out, Xiao Qi really has a good temper." Su Buletin could only laugh at this. A quick glance at the dock showed that Xiao Xiang'er was too embarrassed to show up, and Ning Yu he didn't dare to show up, and they didn't even come to greet their husband. Ning Qingyi and Zhongli Chuchu stood at the back. Ning Qingyi's expression was as cold as ever. He noticed that Su Buling was looking over and turned his head to look away. Zhongli Chuchu lowered his head and looked at the toes of his shoes. His expression seemed a bit reserved. Know what to think. Zhongli Juju also came over, and began to pretend to be a steady and intellectual fairy sister in front of the public. She smiled and nodded gently in a leisurely manner. Calm and beautiful. Seeing that the backyard was not disturbed, Su Buling breathed a sigh of relief and gave Song Yufu a complimentary look. Song Yufu was not used to being in public and flirting with her lover in public. She bit her lower lip and lowered her head. After thinking for a moment, she turned around and ran away early. The boat docked and the pedals rested against the shore. Young Master Xiao Tingxiao jumped down first. After scanning around, he found that no one was coming to pick him up. He waved his folding fan and walked back without interest. Xiao Qi came down with her entourage and looked at a girl's house with a slightly strange look in her eyes. However, the magnanimity accumulated from being in a high position for many years is still there, and he has no intention of competing with the second and third bedrooms. After saying hello with a smile, he led everyone back to Ziajiazhuang. There was a gap in status and generation between Lu Hongluan and Xiao Qi, and they had never had anything in common. After knowing that Xiao Qi had secretly eaten her baby bump in advance, they had nothing in common. After seeing Zhongli Juju, a knowledgeable and talented person, they walked in reminisce about old times together. Su Buling walked with the four girls, and Manzi was the most affectionate, leaning against his hand and chattering about the affairs of the past few days. Song Yufu also wanted to be so intimate, but she was embarrassed and could only secretly try to change the topic to attract Su Buling's attention. Falling in love must be between two people in private. Su Buling is on the edge of a knife, so naturally he can't say flirting words. He is gentle and elegant, and his words are moderate. He asked Nightingale to bring over the gifts prepared in Hangzhou, and everyone was touched by the rain and dew. He gave one piece as a gift and returned the ice flower hibiscus pendant to Zhongli Chuchu. Zhongli Chuchu looked at the jade pendant handed over by Su Buling, but did not reach out to take it. He said softly, "No reward for no merit. Young Master has helped me several times, but I have never thanked Young Master. I should be the one who gave Young Master something. This I have prepared a small item in the past few days. If you are free, sir, you will come with me to the city later and take you to see." When Zhu Manzi and Song Yufu heard this, they squinted slightly and smelled a strange smell. Zhu Manzi turned around and said with a smile, "Xiaozhong, what is it?" "I don't know. It's just a small item." Su Buling naturally did not refuse this, and threw the jade pendant to Zhongli Chuchu, and said with a chuckle, "Miss Chuchu is interested, but it is already afternoon, and I have to arrange some things with you when I go back. Let's do it tomorrow." Zhongli Chuchu was naturally not in a hurry. He nodded slowly and glanced at Ningqingyi to see her reaction. As a result, Ningqingyi looked at the flying snow above the Huihe River and seemed not to care at all. It seemed that it was hidden very deeply. After Xiao Qi returned to the Xiao family's ancestral home, she called all the uncles in each room to the meeting hall. Xiao Ting was pulled over before he could lie down when he returned to the room. He also changed into a rare formal attire, with a scholar's robe, a jade crown, and a jade pendant hanging from his waist. If his expression wasn't slightly blank, he would have looked like a rich man who excelled in his work. The uncle of the second room, Xiao Mo, is the oldest member of the Xiao family. He is sitting on the seat on the right side of the meeting hall, holding a teacup with a calm expression. You may have guessed that Xiao Qi has figured it out and is ready to give up her power and get married. Xiao Qi has the talent of unparalleled in the country, and her knowledge, temperament, etc. are impeccable. It is a blessing for the Xiao family to be the head of the family, but she just gave birth to a girl. It is okay for a woman to be in power for a while, but if she stays in this position for too long, it will be like the Empress Dowager ruling the country from behind the curtain. It is natural for the emperor to be regent when he is young, and if the emperor does not return the power after he reaches adulthood, even if he is very capable, it is inevitable to attract criticism. Moreover, the Empress Dowager gave power to her son, which is a family matter after all. Xiao Qi is in power for her nephew. If she holds on to it, she will definitely not marry. If she recruits a son-in-law, it will be even more troublesome. If Xiao Qi wants her son to be in power in the Xiao family, no one in the Xiao family can fight Xiao Qi, and I am afraid that the incense that has been passed down for thousands of years will be handed over to others. Because of these reasons that cannot be discussed publicly, the uncles and uncles of the Xiao family all support Su Buling's proposal, but it is difficult to persuade Xiao Qi. Now that Xiao Qi has figured it out, everyone is naturally happy. Not only does she not have to worry about the inheritance of blood, but she can also have another prince-in-law. The only side effect is whether Xiao Ting will do something weird. Xiao Qi looked at the uncles and aunts sitting in the hall. After everyone came, he hesitated for a while before speaking softly. Today, I called all the uncles and aunts here for two reasons. One is that the Prince of Suwan came to my Xiao family to propose marriage. I have considered it for many days and found that the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. So I have agreed to the Prince of Suwang's proposal. I will board the ship to Suzhou on a chosen day. Many things of the Xiao family in Dayu and even Baiki and Nanyu will be handed over to Xiao Ting for full decision. Xiao Ting's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he sat up straight, but he frowned again and asked in confusion. "And, our family also has industries in Baiki and Nanyu." The whole place was silent. Xiao Qi rubbed his forehead, and after a long silence, he was very kind, which was unusual. If you don't understand something in the future, don't show your emotions, and ask your advisors after the end. My Xiao family has been passed down for thousands of years, and there are secret agents in Nanyang and the western regions. You will know it later. Xiao Ting was a little frightened when he saw his aunt who didn't scold him. He coughed lightly, pretended to be wise enough to see through everything in the world, sat upright and nodded lightly. "Don't say it, this look is quite intimidating." The uncles and aunts of the Xiao family nodded lightly. As long as they could pretend, it would be fine. Anyway, there were countless advisors in the family, and the head of the family would not cause any big trouble if he just went out and showed off without saying a word. Xiao Qi leaned back on the armchair, looking at the quiet and solemn meeting hall. Her face returned to calm, and she continued. "The second thing is that there will be a great chaos in the court at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. It is unknown where it will start, but it will definitely be before the flood in the south of the Yangtze River subsides. At that time, I hope you will be cautious in your words and deeds, but don't be greedy for success and rush into things. The ancestral motto of my Xiao family is, the Xiao family seeks the world for the people, not for one family. The first sentence of the ancestral motto is the Xiao family, and the second sentence is seeking the world for the people, not for one family. Don't remember it wrong. The meeting hall is full of important elders of the Huainan Xiao family. Naturally, they all understand this. Seeking the world for the people is the family motto, but it is obviously not advisable to pacify the world and the Xiao family will be gone. All weighing and choosing are based on the Xiao family's position will not be shaken after the change of dynasties, which is the code of conduct of the Huainan Xiao family. Of course, this is also the code of conduct of other powerful families. Xiao Qi's meaning was very clear. She thought that the world might be in chaos, so she asked them not to stand in line blindly and not to be cautious. All the uncles in the meeting room nodded slightly, and Xiao Ting also nodded gently. And, don't worry. With me here, the Xiao family will not be in chaos. Xiao Qi had a strange expression and wanted to say, it's because you are here that I worry about the Xiao family being in chaos. However, it would be too hurtful to say this. After thinking about it, she nodded, stood up from behind the desk, and put the family seal on the desk. Pick a good day to announce this matter to the public. You can arrange it yourself. Once I get married, I will no longer be a member of the Xiao family. I will no longer ask about anything or transfer anyone. Where the Xiao family will go depends on you. Xiao Ting held his knees with his hands, looked around, and under the gaze of the uncles from each room, he stood up and sat on the armchair behind the desk. Although he pretended to be calm, Xiao Ting still looked a little nervous. After a long time, he took the seal and put it beside him. The uncles of the Huainan Xiao family stood up and bowed slightly. Master. Xiao Ting coughed lightly. He had been looking forward to his aunt getting married, but now he felt a little reluctant and raised his hand. Well, sit down. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 475. Su Buling came to the back house, and just as he turned into the corridor, Xiao Xiang, who had been waiting for a long time, appeared at the door. As the saying goes, a farewell is better than a wedding. The day before the ship arrived in Huainan, Xiao Xiang couldn't sit still and tossed and turned all night long. At dawn, she started dressing up, dotting her lips and eyebrows, and wearing a red silk gown with moire patterns. Her skirt was arranged meticulously, her water-length hair was tied into Su Buling's favorite hanging cloud bun, a gold hairpin was inserted between the bun, and 2 emerald green earrings trembled as she moved. Dressed in red, she looked dazzling in the wind and snow. Perhaps not wanting to show too much urgency in front of her lover, Xiao Xiang stood outside the door, folded her hands on her waist, slightly raised the corners of her mouth, showed a touching but very calm smile, and said lightly, "Back." Su Bulenling's eyebrows were curved, and his eyes were full of tenderness. He walked quickly to the door and raised his hand for a bear hug. "Baby, do you miss me?" Xiao Xiang's feet were lifted off the ground, her red embroidered shoes embroidered with peonies lightly kicked the hem of her skirt, and her hands patted his shoulders twice. "Su Bulenling, please be honest. How can you be so rude when you touch someone when we meet?" Xiao Xiang was always very strong when she wasn't being pressed down. Su Buring didn't care at all, he carried her into the house, sat down on the carved pillow, held her face in his hands and took a few big sips. Bobo wave. Oops. Xiao Xiang squinted her eyes and leaned back to dodge. After resisting for a few times to no avail, she covered Su Buring's mouth with her hand and frowned. "Speak first. We haven't seen each other for so long. Is this all you think about?" Su Buring chuckled, sat down on the sofa, and said softly, I'm afraid the baby will be impatient, so it's not too late to satisfy the baby first before talking. Who's worried? Xiao Xiang'er glared slightly, with a stoic look, and sat further to the side. She also took out a handkerchief and wiped her cheeks with disdain. Is it you who I'm greedy for? I'm not the kind of woman who covets men. These days, without you making any noise around me, I've been living a peaceful life. Su Buling didn't believe it at all, so he picked up Xiang'er's leg and touched it along the ankle. Really? Let me touch it and see. Xiao Xiang'er kicked off her embroidered shoes twice and said angrily, "You're going to die." She pressed her skirt with her hands and pushed Su Buling away. Let's get down to business first. Did you go to Jiangnan this time to settle my sister? Su Buling took back his hand, behaved himself, and said with a chuckle, "It must have been settled. Your sister agreed to marry to Suzhou and has already gone to the meeting hall to discuss this matter with the uncles in each room." Xiao Xiang'er didn't know about exchanging identities with her sister and exchanging her sister. Seeing that my sister, who had always been aloof and independent, gave in so quickly, she frowned slightly and said, "You won't use force on my sister, will you? Su Buletinling, I told you in advance that if you dare to use dirty methods on my sister to force her to submit, I will hate you forever. How could it be possible? Well, I killed Yang Yingxiang in Jinling and destroyed Hongshan Lake. Your sister was moved by my chivalrous heart and I wrote many poems to her, and then..." Okay. Xiao Xiang'er didn't want to hear about her sister's affair with each other under Huaqianyu. Now that the matter was settled, the sisters would have to serve the same husband together in the future. She looked at Su Buling, her eyes showed a bit of dissatisfaction, and she snorted lightly. "I don't know what good things you did in your previous life to achieve the blessings you have now. If you don't cherish it, be careful." Su Buling nodded seriously, thought for a while, and took out a rouge box and rice paper from his arms. "I picked this for my baby from Hangzhou. In fact, they are all available at home, and I couldn't find anything better, so I thought about it and drew something small." Xiao Xiang'er knew very well the nature of his stinky brother. He always researched some messy stuff, only 10% of which were useful, and the rest were all used to bully others. With a bit of weirdness in her eyes, she took it, put the rouge box at hand, unfolded the rice paper and looked at it a few times. "Could these shoes be a weapon? If the awl is installed under the heel, won't it hurt your feet? You don't have to walk to get dressed, just lie down." After Xiao Qi handed over the seal to her nephew, she had not yet gotten married and had not relieved all her burdens. After finishing the tedious tasks that had accumulated recently in the study, I had time to walk out of the room, and it was getting dark. Xiao Ting was also in the study, probably aware of the heavy burdens he was now carrying. It was rare that he did not go out to show off. He sat quietly behind the desk, with piles of files in front of him, and learned about the various projects of the Xiao family through the master's narration. The Xiao family in Huainan has almost no taboos. They are involved in almost everything, ranging from business, farming, refining medicine and metallurgy, to party disputes in the court, and the dispatch of enemy countries. The huge flow of information needs to be sorted out and the optimal solution can be analyzed without polishing. Ordinary people simply can't do it. However, there are countless advisors in the family to provide advice, and Xiao Qi is not worried about the decline of a 1,000-year-old family. Even if the head of the family does nothing, he will be depressed for a generation at most. Seeing Xiao Ting's serious rote memorization, Xiao Qi gave a rare smile and walked out of the ancestral home alone and came to the mansion where Su Buling lived temporarily. Most of the people living in the mansion were women. As night fell, Zhu Manzi and Ning Qingyi were sitting on the roof, drinking in the cold wind and talking about the Suzhou Flower Sea and the Taoist temple. In the room in the west wing, Song Yufu and Zhongli Chuchu also gathered together, whispering something, looking up at the roof from time to time, and then whispering again. Xiao Qi came in from the veranda and didn't care about the four little girls. There were always a few women in the back houses of wealthy families, as long as they didn't make trouble all day long and disturb the peace of the house. Slowly arriving at the house where Xiao Xiang'er lived, Xiao Qi took a look. The lights were on in the boudoir, the maids were all away, and it was so quiet that there was no sound. Xiao Qi stood there and hesitated for a moment, thinking that her sister might be making out with her husband, but after calculating the time of each Su Bulletin Ling, from the time she came back to now, it should be over, so she didn't feel too taboo, and walked to knocked on the door. Xiang'er. Ah dash. A slightly panicked cry came from the room. In the room filled with incense, Xiao Xiang'er leaned on the couch, holding a small mahogany sign in his hand, and carefully carved the word on Su Buling's face. Hearing her sister's voice, Xiao Xiang'er quickly closed her half-open red skirt, stood up and hid the small box under the soft bag, and signaled to Su Buling, who was drinking tea. Quick, 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 what, the tail? Su Buling didn't seem to hear. He opened the window to let the cold wind dissipate the ambiguous smell in the room, walked to the door and opened it. Outside the room, Xiao Qi, who had just finished her business, had no time to put on makeup. She wore a long black dress without makeup. She looked very intellectual. Her light red lips were charming. The dim light illuminated her long, close-fitting dress, which looked like a gourd. The curves outlined by Ling Long Shenduan are clearly visible. It is not as bold as Xiang'er's, but it has a unique scholarly charm. When Xiao Xiang'er saw her twin sister, her face turned red instantly, and she looked around in panic and ran into the room, just as she said, "Be a good person with your tail between your legs." Xiao Qi glanced around the room and didn't see anything unsightly. She breathed a sigh of relief, ignored Su Buling, walked into the room, and said softly, "Xiang'er, why are you running?" Xiao Xiang'er paused and turned around quickly. Feng Yun's cheeks were slightly red, and she raised her hand to straighten her messy hair. "Sister, why are you here? You don't sleep at night." Xiao Qi's expression was calm. She sat down on the sofa and frowned. "I haven't seen you for a long time. I'm coming back to visit you. Do you still dislike me as a sister?" "No. Just." Xiao Xiang'er's eyes were mixed with annoyance and embarrassment. She glanced at Su Buling, but Su Buling seemed to be fine. She closed the door and came back. She sat down on the chair next to her and gave Xiao Qi pour the tea. "This bastard." Xiao Xiang'er glared at Su Buling with a cannibalistic look, but received no response. She could only walk with difficulty, walked to Ruandan, and said with a smile, "It's just a little unexpected. I was talking to Su Buling, and I didn't do anything immoral." "Oh." Xiao Qi didn't believe this nonsense at all. She didn't take the teacup that Su Buling handed over, but patted her side. "What are you standing for? Come sit down and I'll talk to you about the future." "No. No need." Xiao Xiang'er walked slowly behind Ruandan, rubbed Xiao Qi's shoulders, and smiled gently. "Sister, just say it, I will listen to you in everything." Seeing that her sister was so considerate, Xiao Qi felt a little warmer in her heart. She put Xiao Xiang'er's hand on her shoulder and said softly, "In order for you to be able to meet others openly in the future, I agreed to marry Su Buling, but I made a three-part agreement with you in advance. After arriving in Suzhou, I have full control over the family affairs, and you can only go out to relax in the name of the princess. You can't make decisions, you can't manage accounts, and you can't interfere in military and government affairs." Xiao Xiang'er never thought about this and nodded quickly. I know, sister, it's getting late. You've been working hard for so long, it's time to go back and rest." "Go back and rest? I just sat down." When Xiao Qi heard this, she suddenly felt uncomfortable. For the sake of her sister, she first lost her body in the palace and suffered the loss of being mute, and then struggled with it for half a year. Now she doesn't even care about the fact that sisters serve the same husband. Being a sister must be a bit touching, right? Just because she had a secret meeting with her lover, she kicked her sister out because she thought she was a disgrace? If I don't care about this, when I become a princess in the future, I won't be bullied to death by the sister. Xiao Qi frowned and thought about it for a moment, then stood up and said, "That's fine, I won't disturb your rest, please or not, you go out with me, I'll see you if I have anything to do." According to Xiao Qi's prediction, when Xiao Xiang'er heard this, she would be reluctant to leave and try to find a way to keep Su Buletinling. But what Xiao Qi didn't expect was that Xiao Xiang'er looked like she was being pardoned, and raised her hand to drive her and Su Buling out. "Okay, Su Buletinling, please go out with your sister quickly." Xiao Qi was really confused this time. Could it be that she was afraid that she would find out about the affair between the two of them just now? She guessed it before she came over, and there was nothing else to hide. Su Buling, who was drinking tea next to him, stood up and said with a smile, "We're here now. It's snowing outside again. It's not convenient to slide back in the dark. How about resting here, young lady?" Xiao Xiang'er didn't understand yet, so she raised her hand and said, "Yes, I promise, you can send sister down to rest." Xiao Qi's eyes were a little strange. She looked Su Buling's body for a few times and said inexplicably, "Are you okay? Aren't you afraid of dying from exhaustion?" Su Buling took a breath, with a gentle smile, and spread his hand slightly. "How about giving it a try?" Xiao Qi said turned around and walked out without any intention of trying. Unfortunately, as soon as he took 2 steps, he was hugged by Su Buling with one hand. Xiao Xiang'er, who was seeing off the guests, was stunned when she saw this, and her eyes suddenly showed a bit of anger. "Su Buletinling, you are so presumptuous." Before he could finish his words, he saw his sister, who never loses her majesty in front of others, being hugged around the waist. When he picked him up, he didn't even look surprised, and he naturally hooked his arms around Su Buling's neck. Although Xiao Xiang'er was not as resourceful as Xiao Qi, she was not stupid at all. She immediately noticed something was wrong, her mouth opened slightly, and her eyes were full of astonishment. Xiao Qi's absolutely rational way of thinking allowed her to adapt quickly to anything she faced. She had already decided to marry Su Buling, and she did not hesitate in front of her sister. Because Xiang'er had suffered a lot in the past, now he still wanted to take revenge. He patted Su Buling's chest and said in a soft voice, "Mister, let's go back to the room." Xiao Xiang'er's almond-shaped eyes widened, feeling that she had heard wrongly. She had no idea that her all-powerful sister would become like this in just a few days. Is this still her sister who, if she were a man, she could be a national scholar? Bewitched by a witchcraft? Maybe she really was under witchcraft, she seemed to be like this back then. The thoughts in his mind changed countless times. When Xiao Xiang'er faced her sister's attempt to win her love, she didn't say anything. Instead, she raised her hand to urge Su Buletin, "Go quickly and stay with your sister." Xiao Qi was completely stunned when she heard this. Is this still my sister who fights for everything? I've already started to steal your man, are you so generous? The two sisters stared at each other, unable to understand what the other was up to. Su Buling coughed lightly and chuckled, "Stop arguing, let's rest." He blew out the candle and picked up Xiang'er. Xiao Qi was stunned for a moment, then reacted instantly, with shame and anger in her eyes. "Yeah, Su Buletinling. You are so impudent, let me down." Xiao Xiang'er was also stunned, but her mind was not focused on this kind of thing at this time. She shook her head in embarrassment. "Good brother, please don't. Next time, you can send your sister back to the room first. I will listen to you in everything." "Xiang'er, what's wrong with you? Why are you so afraid of him?" "I promise, Please get out. Will you try again? Forget it, I won't argue with you, I'll go out and you and Xiang'er have a good chat, Good brother, I bid you. Hey, Xiang'er, behind you, that's how it is. I don't want to live anymore, The winter wind blows, and the courtyard is quiet. Snowflakes fall silently in the garden, and the scenery here is unique. 10,000 words. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 476. The next day, the morning light first appeared. The snow that fell all night fell in the courtyard, and the strange flowers and rocks were covered with white. The maids were sweeping the snowflakes in the courtyard, and the courtyard was silent. Su Buling put on his robe, opened the window and stretched. He found that his waist was a little sore, so he raised his hands and rubbed it. Looking back, the room was in a mess, belly bands and underwear were scattered everywhere. Xiang'er was dressed in red, and Xiao Qi liked to wear black, so it was easy to tell who belonged to them. The curtain was lifted a little, revealing some scenery inside the carved soft bed. Xiao Qi, who got up early, supported her upper body with her hands, her long hair hanging down, and was reaching out to pick up the clothes on the ground. When she noticed Su Buletinling looking over, her face turned slightly red, she pulled up the quilt, her expression was as calm as ever. Surprised, he didn't show much cowardice. Xiao Xiang'er was lying on her side, covering her face with the quilt. She didn't know whether it was because she was afraid of the cold or because she was shy about seeing people, but she had been in this position for a long time. Su Buling was not surprised by this. Although Xiang'er obeyed him in private, she was a conservative-minded woman after all, and she did not have the calmness to see through the world like her sister. It was difficult for her to accept her sister's discovery of her tale. I almost fainted from embarrassment last night, and I haven't recovered yet. On the surface, Xiao Qi remained motionless, but due to her personality, she would never show timidity in front of her sister and Su Buling. When she saw that her resistance was fruitless last night, she acted like it doesn't matter and allowed him to do whatever he wanted. However, both sisters have become very conservative, refusing to show any initiative, not even humming, and not cooperating at all. The feeling was really ecstatic. With a slight smile, Su Buring picked up his clothes, walked to the bed and sat down. Xiao Qi's eyes lost their usual sharpness, she dodged left and right, looked back at her sister, and then said softly, "Su Buletinling, you are too presumptuous. Anyway, no one knows." Su Buletinling chuckled and comforted her, helped Xiao Qi put on her dress, and kissed Xiao Qi on the lips. Xiao Qi was like a busy person who got up early to go to work and had to go back to Xiao's house to deal with tedious matters. After thinking about it, she kissed Su Buling back and hurried out of the yard. Su Buling watched Xiao Qi's figure disappear at the corner of the corridor. He turned around and saw that Xiao Xiang'er no longer pretended to be asleep. She turned over and ran to him with bare feet on the floor. Her body was trembling and her almond-shaped eyes were trembling. With a flame of shame and anger in his heart, he raised his hand and slapped Su Buling. "Asshole, I will fight with you." Su Buling was hit on the chest with a small fist, so naturally he did not dare to fight back. He hugged Xiang'er to avoid catching a cold and said softly, "Baby, I was wrong, don't be angry." Xiao Xiang'er's face turned red, and she hit Su Buling several times on the chest. Still not relieved, she took out a small box from under the bed and threw it out of the window. "Su Buletinling, you are finished. You will never think about it again in this life." Su Buring hurriedly took Xiao Xiang'er back, covered him with a quilt, took off the treasure box, and put it back under the bed. "Baby, Don't make trouble, no one is laughing at you. Xiao Xiang'er frowned and looked embarrassed. You still have the nerve to say that? In front of my sister, you bastard dares to mess around. Why don't you do that to my sister? The people do not suffer from scarcity but from inequality. Su Buring understood immediately and said with a smile, okay, next time I torture your sister, I want you to hold her down, okay. Xiao Xiang'er glared at Su Buling with a cannibalistic look. After all, she couldn't do anything to him, so she turned around and her head was covered. Get out, I don't want to see you these days, don't come over and bother me. Su Buling shook his head and sighed softly. He coaxed her carefully and talked about love for a long time before Xiang'er's embarrassment subsided a little, but she still refused to get up. Seeing this, Su Buling didn't bother him much. He told the baby to sleep more, closed the door, and came to the outer courtyard. It was still early, and the maids had already prepared breakfast. After Su Buling washed up, he was about to have a quick bite to visit his master, but Lu Hongluan stood in the corridor early, raising her hand and beckoning him to come over. Lu Hongluan's body was relatively weak. After a long journey, he rested for a night before regaining his usual complexion. Under the eaves of the snow-covered veranda, a green shawl is draped over a long dark green skirt, and her eyebrows are neatly trimmed with clouds, just like a peony in bud in the snow. Su Buling walked closer and said with a smile, Aunt Lu, are you up so early? Lu Hongluan raised her eyes and glanced at Xiao Xiang'er's yard. There was a hint of blush on Feng Yun's cheeks. She pulled Su Buring's sleeves back to her room and said softly. Ling-er, Xiao Qi was also in the house yesterday? What did you do? Lu Hongluan's eyes looked slightly strange. He had obviously guessed what happened last night, but he couldn't believe it. For the first time, Xiao Qi broke the rules and acted promiscuously before marriage, but she still stayed with Xiang'er. It was really. Su Buling supported Lu Hongluan's arm and explained with a smile, it's nothing, just chatting together. Chat? Lu Hongluan didn't believe it at all, but she was too embarrassed to say more about this kind of thing, so she just glanced at Su Buling's body. The two came to the room. There were several exquisite porridges on the table and stewed soup. It was rich in color and aroma, including yam, ginseng, black wolfberry. Great supplement. Su Buling blinked his eyes and wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, he decided to forget it. He sat down at the table obediently, picked up a spoon and filled a bowl for Lu Hongluan, and then another bowl for himself, and ate happily. Lu Hongluan sat next to Su Buling, serving porridge and vegetables. She was gentle and considerate. When Su Buling didn't speak, she hesitated for a moment and persuaded him. Ling-er, gentle places are the graves of heroes. Even a strong body cannot withstand the ecstasy of a beauty if it is not restrained. The monarchs and princes in history have enjoyed all the wealth and honor of the world since childhood, but their lifespans are not as long as those of the monks and Taoist priests in the temple. The reason is that they do not know how to restrain themselves. They indulge in wine and sex at a young age and hollow out their bodies. Su Buling nodded gently, Aunt, I know the limits. What limits do you know? I don't know what you look like. On the surface, you are pure and unsexy, but when you get into the room, your true colors are exposed. Women all look the same, and no one has more or less of anything, especially Xiang'er and Xiao Qi, who look exactly the same. One is enough, but you still call them all into the room. Mrs. Lu kept muttering, and besides caring, she was also a little jealous. It was like her own good horse being ridden to death by others without mercy. It was difficult to say anything to Xiao Qi and Xiang'er, so she could only scold Su Buling in private. Su Buling felt warm in his heart, nodded and chuckled, I know, I will pay more attention next time. Lu Hongluan snorted lightly and poured another bowl of soup. What do you know? You say one thing and do another, and you never listen to me in private. I have to set rules for you in the future. There is no order without rules. Just like in the palace, whenever the emperor visits his concubine, he must follow the doctor's advice and follow the time. Forget it, how boring. Lu Hongluan pursed her lips, her eyes showed a little, she sighed softly, feeling resentful. Alas, forget it, I'm not your aunt anyway. You dare to do whatever you want to me now. How can I control you? I'm useless. Su Buling's scalp numbed, and he said helplessly, okay, let's talk about it after we return to Suzhou. Now I live in the Xiao family, and I can't enforce the rules even if I set them, right? Lu Hongluan's expression eased a little, and she let Su Buling finish his food, took out the medicinal wine from the cabinet, and forced Su Buling to lie on the small couch. Su Buling had no room to resist, and he obediently undressed and lay on the couch. Lu Hongluan sat in front of him, rolled up her sleeves, poured the medicinal wine on her hands, and complained softly. Xiang that damn girl, only knows how to eat but not how to take care of yourself. She exhausted you that day, but she was the one who suffered. Su Buling smiled, and felt Aunt Lu riding on his back again, and wanted to turn over. Aunt Lu, I'm really fine, if you don't believe me, try it. Lu Hongluan raised her hand and patted him on the back. Lie down, if you move again, I will tell Xiang and see if she is embarrassed to let you stay overnight. Then she began to rub and press. Because she had a relatively close contact with Su Buling, Lu Hongluan is no longer shy now, and she is open and unrestrained. Su Buling was fine at first, but he was given a lot of supplements just now, and now he is served like this, so he feels a little uncomfortable. Feeling every bit of the contact surface, the delicate touch of the camel toe rubs with the movement, and dare not move, it is not an exaggeration to say that it is like a year. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 477. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Su Buling escaped from Aunt Lu's clutches and came to Xiangshan to watch outside alone. The mountains are covered with snow, and there are few pilgrims on the two trails. There are no incense vendors on the road. Occasionally, farmers go up the mountain to worship the gods. They also carry incense baskets and burn a stick of incense in front of the statue of Lejun, praying for good weather in the coming year and a happy family. Then he took care of himself and left. The old Taoist priest in the temple is quite old and has poor hearing and eyesight. He does not care about worldly affairs except opening and closing doors. The Quanzhen sect forbids sexual immorality and does not practice divination, and unlike Buddhism, which requires believers to bow 3 times and kowtow 3 times to be sincere, this is well reflected in Xiangshan Temple. They just say if you believe it, if you don't believe it, get out. There are no small Taoist boys, so it's no wonder that there are only a few incense gates. Su Buling didn't believe in ghosts and gods, but he knew the rules. When he entered the Taoist temple, he first lit incense sticks in front of the statue of Lejun. Regardless of whether it was useful or not, he prayed for the people around him. After donating some incense money, he went to the back of the Taoist temple to make offerings. The wing where pilgrims live. This small Taoist temple in a remote area has no other advantages except for its elegant environment. The house was built during the Daqi period of the previous dynasty. The old beams have been exposed to the wind and sun for many years, and it is no longer possible to see the auspicious animals carved on them. The tiles are probably still leaking. The rain had just been cleaned up, and the ladder was still set up on the wall next to it. There is an incense burner in the small yard outside the wing. Ning Yuhi is wearing a black Taoist robe, holding his own sword, and is slowly practicing his sword skills. His movements are as gentle as flowing clouds, and his expression is as calm as Shishui, which is pleasing to the eye. From the Xiangshan temple, you can overlook the Huihe River. Ning Yuhi has learned that Su Buling has returned to Zhijiazhuang, but he does not dare to behave strangely on the surface. The palace guard Sand is gone and he cannot go back to meet him. He has been waiting in the Taoist temple. I thought that Su Buling would come last night. Ning Yu stayed up all night alone in the empty boudoir, and even prepared the words to resist. However, after waiting for a night of cold wind, desolate mountains, and not even a ghost, I didn't see it. How could I be in a good mood? I was practicing my martial arts on my own, turning a blind eye to Su Buling who came over. Su Buling stood under the eaves with his hands behind his back, admiring Ning Yu's pleasing sword posture, and called out softly, "Master, I'm back." Ning Yu didn't respond in time. After finishing a set of sword moves, he made a sword-sheathing gesture. He took a long breath, raised his sleeves and wiped the fine beads of sweat on his forehead, then turned and walked into the room. "Your Majesty, come with me." Su Buletinling followed Ning Yu into the small room with a smile on his face. There was only a table, a bed, and a chair in the room, which was similar to the room he had been in when he was confined under the Bell and Drum Tower. It looked a little miserable. Ning Yu held the door and glanced outside for a few times, then closed the door, bolted the door, turned around, and untied the belt around his waist. Su Buling originally wanted to say a few words, but when he saw this scene, he swallowed the words on his lips, sat down by the bed with a smile, raised his hands and untied the jade belt around his waist. "Master, have you been holding back too much these days? What's so hard to hold back?" Ning Yu untied his Taoist robe, only wearing a white bellyband embroidered with lotus flowers. He walked quickly to the front. Seeing Su Buling take off his clothes, he kicked Su Buling's legs lightly in annoyance, then squatted down and leaned his upper body under the bed. Fumbling for something, Su Buletinling sat in front of him, looking at Ning Yu's exposed lower waist. Ning Yu was lying under the bed, her tight-fitting thin pants were stretched tightly, the round curves were full of tension, and her buttocks swayed slightly with the movement. "I'm afraid the saint couldn't control this situation." Snap! A crisp sound appeared in the silent cabin. Ning Yu, who was looking for something under the bed, shivered and almost lifted the bed board. He came out in a hurry, with shame and anger on his white cheeks. He threw away the wooden box containing the brushes and paints, and raised his hand to get the sword. "You evil disciple, I will fight with you." Su Buling rubbed his fingers with a calm expression. "Master, there are mosquitoes." "What kind of mosquitoes are there in the coldest month of winter?" You. Ning Yu had a gentle temperament and was not very angry. He glared at Su Buling for a moment, and when he saw that his expression was as usual and he was not making any progress, he had no choice but to treat it as a mosquito and swatted him. Ning Yu sat down next to Su Buling, hesitated for a moment, then pulled down his thin pants a little, his face turned red. "Ling please draw it for me quickly. King Yi has come to see me many times, and Zonglju, that old lady Ju, is here too, and I'm afraid of being discovered by them, so I don't even dare to leave the Taoist temple." Ning Yu obviously tried to draw it himself, but due to the angle problem, he must not have drawn it well in the end, otherwise he would not be so eager to find Su Buling. Su Buling glanced at it. Even though he had seen it many times, his heart was slightly shaken. He stood up and squatted half in front of Ning Yu, with his eyes level with his abdomen. He took the brush over and said with his eyes, "I know, take your hands away." Ning Yu bit her lower lip lightly, moved her eyes to the corner of the room, and slowly let go of her hand without looking at Su Buling. Su Buling knew that Ning Yu was thin-skinned, so he didn't want to push her into a hurry. He painted seriously and didn't touch randomly. Just when the man's breath blew on his skin, Ning Yu inevitably reacted. He clenched his hands tightly, probably trying to distract himself from his thoughts, and said, "Ling have you agreed to become Zhongli Jiju's disciple?" Su Buling shook his head. "How could it be? I promised the master not to accept her as his disciple, and I will definitely not break his promise. That's good. Ning Yuhi responded softly, pondered for a moment, and then remembered what Zhongli Jiju said last time. She turned around and looked down at Su Buling, who looked attentive. Your Majesty, there are many evil ways in Zhongli Jiju society, and they do have some skills that they can teach you, but I can't teach you anything. I have always prevented you from becoming her teacher, and do you think I am arrogant because of my favor? Are you bothering me? If you really want to become a disciple, I don't mind, we are not considered masters and disciples anyway. Su Buling smiled softly. The sage said, when three people are together, there must be a teacher. Everyone has advantages and disadvantages, and the master always has something to teach me. And even if there is nothing to teach, you can give me a son. My daughter is not the same. How could I bother master? It's too late to like her. Have a baby. When Ning Yuhi heard this, his first reaction was not shame and anger. She has been lonely guarding the Taoist temple all year round and dependent on her disciples. As a normal woman, she has no desire to accompany her husband and raise her children. Now I have finally found my husband, but... Ning Yuhi shook his head. No matter how you say it, I am your master to the outside world. Many people know it. If I am pregnant with your child, how will I explain it to others? I can't say that it was conceived by an immortal in a dream. Su Buling carefully sketched the pink pattern of the flying phoenix spreading its wings, and said with a smile, I will be King Su in the future. To be honest, as a vassal king, ordinary people would not dare to make irresponsible remarks about who is in the back house. Master, if you really care, just expel me, a bastard who deceives your master and destroys your ancestors, from your master's school, and then marry me. Well. Ning Yuhi always felt weird talking about these things. He hesitated for a long time and stopped talking. After Su Buling finished the painting, he kissed her, causing Ning Yuhi to frown again, put on a white skirt, and warned, go back first, we will talk about this kind of thing, at night. Su Buling didn't want to force Ning Yuhi to break the precepts in Quanzhen Taoist Temple, so he nodded and helped pack away daily items. Outside the wall of Xiangshan Temple, there is a deserted forest with fallen leaves and branches. A thin layer of snow covers the fallen leaves that have accumulated more than a foot deep. It has been inaccessible for many years. Except for the cold wind blowing on the bare branches, there is no movement at all. However, if someone is careful and compares it carefully on the courtyard wall, they will find that there is a slightly raised area in the fallen leaves under the courtyard wall. Under the fallen leaves, Zhongli Jiju remained motionless, calm and focused, even his heartbeat and breathing were reduced to a minimum, and he patiently listened to the movements inside the courtyard wall. Zhongli Jiju travels around the world all year round. The reason why she is called Yejuniang is because she comes and goes without a trace. She is very good at hiding her body. She is always the only one looking for people, and no one looks for her. After Su Buletinling came back yesterday, Zhongli Jiju knew that she would definitely come to visit Ning Yuhi. She wanted to hear whether Ning Yuhi would stop Su Buletinling from becoming her disciple, and how he would do it, so last night he came over, first made some noise and attracted Ning Yuhi to go out to check, and then hid here. Lying under the dim snow quilt, Zhongli Jiju waited patiently all night. As she expected, Su Buring came over. However, the movement that came made her a little confused. Master, have you been holding back too much these days? What's so hard to hold back? The voice was soft, not like a master and a disciple, but more like a man and woman with a close relationship. Zhongli Jiju was at a loss and couldn't figure out what the master and disciple were talking about. Before analyzing the results, there was a crisp sound in the room. It seemed that someone slapped someone. Judging from the sound, it was not the face, but... Zhongli Jiju became more and more confused. Just when he was thinking about how Ning Yuhi could call Su Buling there, Ning Yuhi's embarrassed and angry whisper came. "You evil disciple, I will fight with you. Master, there are mosquitoes." "What kind of mosquitoes are there in the coldest month of winter?" You. Oh my God." Zhongli Jiju almost lost his balance, his hand tightened a little, and he suppressed it forcefully so that he didn't move. His heart was filled with disbelief. She knew that Su Buling was a bit lustful, but she never expected that he would even dare to take advantage of his master. This was too exciting. Zhongli Jiju felt like he had discovered a treasure. He listened intently to see what else he could find. It said that he wanted to paint, but he didn't know exactly what he was painting, but the two of them finally talked about becoming her teacher. "Would you think that I am arrogant and bother me? Giving me a son and a daughter is not the same. If I am pregnant with your child, how will I explain it to others? Just expel me, a bastard who deceives his master and destroys his ancestors, from the master, and then marry me." Shocking words kept coming, which directly confused Zhongli Jiju, and he didn't react for a long time. God! What kind of master and disciple are these? They are obviously a pair of wild mandarin ducks. Listening to Ning Yuhi's tone, he even did that kind of thing. She thought Ning Yuhi was just secretly in unrequited love. No wonder Su Buletin went back on his word and refused to accept her as his teacher, and his tone was so harsh. No wonder Ning Yuhi was so confident that he didn't take her seriously. Zhongli Jiju was stunned for a long time. When he came to his senses, there was no movement in the room and the footsteps gradually faded away. Zhongli Jiju rolled up from under the snow quilt, her fox-like charming eyes were full of disbelief, and she looked no less than Zhongli Chuchu when she learned that Ning Qingyi and Su Buling were messing around. But seeing is believing, the conversation just now could not have been misunderstood. Ning Yuhi, who had been fighting with her for half a life, was indeed having an affair with his apprentice and had already started talking about having children. Zhongli Jiju finally understood why she had tried so hard to snatch a disciple, but failed. Her original intention was wrong. She tried hard to snatch a disciple, but Ning Yuhi was whispering in her ear. If she could snatch a disciple, it would be a miracle. What to do now? Zhongli Jiju's eyes were a little confused. Now it seemed that Su Buling was not Ning Yuhi's disciple, but Ning Yuhi's man. Even if she became Su Buling's master, it would be meaningless. Could it be that she really snatched a man from Ning Yuhi? Zhongli Jiju's face, whose age could not be seen, showed a little bit of shyness. After all, snatching Ba Kuei and snatching a disciple were all external matters, but snatching a man would involve herself. This kind of thing, at least it must be consensual. "Do you like Su Buling?" Zhongli Jiju frowned and thought for a while, then shook her head. She was determined to take Su Buling as her disciple, and she definitely didn't have the mind of a taboo love. But the last time he applied medicine to Su Buling, the way Su Buling looked at her showed that he was attracted to her. If he wanted to snatch her away, it wouldn't be difficult. What a mess of thoughts. Zhongli Jiju stood up and patted her skirt. She looked around and didn't know what to do. After combing her hair a little, Zhongli Jiju suddenly looked a little shocked and panicked. A few days ago, it seemed that she had encouraged Chuchu to pursue Su Buling. How could this be possible? Ning Yuhi and her apprentice could share a husband regardless of etiquette and rules. She would not marry the same person as her apprentice who she treated as her own daughter. She had goosebumps just thinking about it. What if she really wanted to snatch a man from Ning Yuhi in the future? No, she had to stop Chuchu. Chuchu didn't seem to like Su Buling yet. She couldn't tie the red thread. Zhongli Jiju thought for a moment. In order to prevent regrets in the future, she decided to stop Chuchu first. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 478. Su Buling and Ning Yu joined forces and headed back from the main road to Ziajiazhuang. When he arrived in public, Ningyu he returned to his gentle and demure appearance. He walked in front with his sword in hand. He didn't look away and couldn't tell anything strange. However, when no one was around, he would still say a few words. Your Majesty, don't act on your own initiative when you get back. If you want, say hello to me secretly, and we'll go to the city to find an inn. If Miss Song bumps into you again. Su Buling nodded with a smile. Yu Fu is the most sensible and won't talk nonsense. Everything is calm in Zhuangzi now, master, don't worry. How could Ningyu he not be worried, and he couldn't stay away from Su Buling forever. As long as he continued to maintain the relationship, sooner or later it would be broken, and it would only take one day to delay. The fast horse galloped through the official road and past the octagonal archway outside Ziajiazhuang. Su Buling looked from a distance. Under the archway stood a girl in red, her face covered with red gauze and holding a white camel, looking forward to it. Su Buletinling thought of giving gifts, drove his horse to the foot of the big archway, reined in his horse and stopped. Miss Chuchu. Zhongli Jiju and Ningyu he have been fighting for many years, and the small conflicts between them cannot be resolved. However, Zhongli Chuchu has always felt that this kind of competition is a bit of a joke, and he has no hostility towards Ningyu he. He nodded slightly and saluted. Senior Ning, Mr. Su. Ningyu he's attitude was gentle and he nodded lightly. He could tell that Zhongli Chuchu was waiting for Su Buletin's order. Naturally, he could not disturb the junior's flowers before and under the moon. He drove his horse into Zhuangzi and said, I still have something to do, so let's go first. Let's talk. Zhongli Chuchu cast a grateful look, sat sideways on the camel, and said with a smile. Master Su, I said yesterday. Let's go. Naturally, Mr. Su didn't need the girl's reminder. He turned his horse's head and walked towards Huainan City. He chuckled and said, What gift did Miss Chu prepare? I have to make a special trip to the city. You won't buy me a shop. Master Su is joking, well, you'll find out as soon as you go. Zhongli Chuchu looked a little strange, riding a camel and leading the way without saying a word. The two people soon arrived at the nearby Huainan City. The streets were full of merchants and tourists. It was a good time for the weather to be sunny after the snow. Scholars and talented people gathered in restaurants and tea houses. Lang Lang's poems were intertwined with the vendors' shouts. As the adults went to the city to buy New Year goods, the children laughed and played, and the scene of the prosperous age was undoubtedly revealed. Su Buling was dressed in white and had a jade belt, riding a tall horse that was rare in Jiangnan. He walked through the long street and attracted a lot of eyes, but most of them were the envious eyes of scholars. Zhongli Chuchu, who is sitting sideways on a white camel, can overwhelm 99% of women with her tall figure alone. The camel's bells jingle as she walks through the streets, and almost everyone doesn't turn around and take a second look. Zhongli wore a veil, not wanting to attract too many people's attention, and quickly came to a painting boat moored next to Yanshan Street. The Huafang was the one the four girls took together last time. They knew each other and booked it directly. Su Buling tied the horse on the street, and after boarding the boat girl got off the boat with a smile. Zhongli Chuchu supported the bamboo pole and pushed the small boat away from the street. He followed the river through various forms on both sides and arrived at the fairy lake at the foot of Shungeng Mountain. Shungeng Mountain, as the name suggests, is the place where Emperor Shun cultivated in ancient times. An academy was built on it, with beautiful scenery surrounded by mountains and rivers. It is winter, and there are few people on Fairy Lake, which is not large in size. Looking around, the sky and the earth are vast, the lake is as flat as a mirror, and the eaves and green tiles of the academy buildings can be seen between the dense mountains and forests. The snow is being cleared in front of the master's courtyard, and the scenery and artistic conception are also beautiful. Su Buring stood on the deck, glanced at the lake scenery, and nodded slightly. This is a good gift, the girl is interested. Zhongli Chuchu stopped the boat in the middle of the lake. After looking around to make sure no one was disturbing him, he walked into the cabin and raised his fingers. "Mr. Su, come in." Su Buling blinked, hesitated, nodded, and chuckled, and came to the small boat. The painting boat is usually used to welcome scholars and talented people to visit Huainan City. It has a piano table, a painting table, a table, and a chess table. The space is spacious and elegantly decorated. It has been tidied up in advance. Zhongli Chuchu glanced back, and after seeing Su Buling come in, he raised his hand to take down the window support, walked to the door again, and closed the door. Su Buling frowned slightly, looked at the small room with the doors and windows closed, secretly noticed something was wrong, raised his hand and said, "Miss Chuchu, what are you doing?" Zhongli Chuchu's face turned a little red. After closing the cabin door, he raised his hand to untie the belt around his waist and took off the wide red gauze covering the outside. The light was a bit dim when the doors and windows were closed, but when the red gauze faded away, it seemed to become brighter again. Rugjia's shoulders exude a white color, smooth and traceless, with silver bells on her wrists, and waist bells on Rufeng's thin waist. She wears a red diagonal skirt covering her legs, with silver tassels swaying gently, and the diagonal skirt has very little fabric. The right side is bent up to the leg, and the left side is directly up to the waist. The skirt is held together with jade buttons. At a glance, it looks like there is only a piece of red silk around the waist. A slight step forward can reveal infinite scenery. Su Buling was so shocked that the master took off his clothes when they met, just for painting. What kind of opera was Zhongli Chuchu doing? This was the first time he had seen a swimsuit in ancient times. No matter where it came from or whether it was good looking or not, he obviously couldn't stand it. At that moment, he quickly turned his head, raised his hand and said, "Miss Chuchu, what are you doing?" "I'm not a good person, but I'm not a casual person, you respect yourself." Zhongli Chuchu was originally in a state of anxiety, but when she saw Su Buling tilting his head and speaking incoherently, his green eyes became quieter, and he raised his hand to take off the veil. Her red lips are dripping with blood, her face is like jade, and her bright makeup is extremely beautiful. This situation can be described very appropriately by the phrase "colorful threads are lightly wrapped around the red jade arms, small charms are hung diagonally on green cloud servant girls, and the beauties have been together for 1,000 years." Zhongli and Chu Chuqian calmed down, walked to the tea table, and poured a cup of tea. Mr. Su was shocked. "They are all dressed like this in the western regions." "Well, I think you have never seen them before. You just need to get used to them." Su Buletinling frowned, opened his eyes and scanned it, and after making sure that Zhongli Chuchu didn't take off his clothes anymore, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief, sat down on the couch, looked away, and said softly, "Miss Chuchu, you are, that's all. If you have anything to say, just say it. If your master knows, he will definitely ignore me." There was a bit of luster in Zhongli's emerald green eyes. In the past, Su Buling's eyes in her eyes were calm, with no emotion or anger at all. This was the first time she had seen such a messed up look. After reading what the master said, there is indeed some truth to it. No matter how cold a man is, if he wears enough little clothes, he will not be able to get cold. Zhongli Chuchu liked the way Su Buring deliberately turned his head to avoid taking advantage of her. He walked up to Su Buring with a teacup and said softly, "Mr. Su, drink tea." Su Buling's scalp was numbed by the crisp voice. He liked Jeju's quirky temperament very much, so he definitely couldn't treat his apprentice lightly. Seeing Zhongli Chuchu approaching, so close, Su Buring had to raise his hand to take the teacup and take a sip, but the water was boiling. Cough 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 dash. "Mr. Su, the water is hot, please slow down." Zhongli Jeju picked up the handkerchief and wiped it with Su Buling, with a sly smile clearly in his eyes. Su Buling took the handkerchief, wiped his mouth, and said helplessly, "Miss Chu Chu, if you have something to say, please tell me. Well, I have to go back to Zhuangzi, and I don't have much time." Zhongli smiled brightly, nodded lightly, and took a few steps back. "Young Master Su has helped me many times, but I have never thanked you. I happened to learn a dance recently. Why don't I dance for you, if you are satisfied with it? If so, do you think it's a favor?" Su Buling sighed softly and looked more seriously. "Miss Chu Chu, do you like me?" Zhongli Chuchu's face turned red, and he shook his head and said, "Sir, don't talk nonsense. The friendship between gentlemen is as light as water. I just treat you as a friend and dance for you to appreciate it. If you think too much, you will fall behind. You're dressed like this, do you think the friendship between gentlemen is as light as water?" Su Buling spread his hands slightly. It was inappropriate to get up and leave, so he had to sit upright on the couch and nodded lightly. "I was wrong. Miss Chu Chu can dance if she wants." Zhongli Chuchu bowed slightly and bowed, and then performed an exotic belly dance in front of Su Buling. Ding dong ding dong. Pearl tassels rotate and stars shake, flowers and vines flutter, dragons and snakes move. Dancing low to the moon in the heart of the willow tower, singing to the wind under the peach blossom fan. Mozillion is wearing incense and carrying the steps, and the long sorrow is gone with the lingering socks. I saw the dance returning to the wind, but there was nowhere to go. Zhongli Chuchu obviously has a talent for dancing. Her legs hidden in the red skirt are looming, showing off the beauty of her body as she moves around, making it difficult for people to take their eyes away with just one glance. Su Buletinling rubbed his fingers. He didn't want to look at it for fear of going crazy, but he had to look at it. He could only act calmly and stare at the silver bell on Zhongli Chuchu's hand without looking elsewhere. Zhongli Chuchu noticed Su Buling's strangeness, and smiled even more in her heart. She deliberately danced in a more seductive posture and joked softly. "Mr. Su, you didn't seem like this when I danced in Suzhou City last time. Why are you so unnatural today?" "This is no nonsense, I didn't know your master at that time." Su Buling pondered for a while, shook his head and chuckled. "Last time the girl danced just fine, but this time she danced really beautifully. I thought the young master didn't like to see this. How can a normal man not like sensuality? Miss Chu Chu is tired from dancing, why don't we put on our clothes and play chess?" "Playing chess or something like that is not as interesting as dancing, Mr. Su, what do you think?" "Of course I feel the same way." Su Buletinling spread his hands and was speechless. Zhongli Chuchu had always been unable to suppress Su Buling before, but now he finally had the upper hand. Just as he was about to take the lead and tease Su Buling a few times, the boat suddenly sank slightly and made a muffled sound of dong, and then the woman's anxious voice could be heard. "Come. No. Come out." The voice was anxious, as if catching someone raping someone. It was Zhongli Jiju's voice. Earlier, Zhongli Jiju, who was in a state of confusion, came out of Xiangshan viewpoint. Unexpectedly, he bumped into Su Buling and teetered back to Xiajiazhuang from the trail. Ning Qingyi and Manzi were sparring as they hurried to the residence where they were temporarily staying. Song Yufu sat on the veranda and watched, but there was no sign of Zhongli Chuchu. Zhongli Jiju searched around but couldn't find Chuchu, so he had to ask. "Miss Song, have you seen Chuchu?" Song Yufu shook her head. "Chuchu went out early in the morning, saying he was going out for a walk, but he didn't know where he went." Xiao Manzi, who was being beaten by Ning Qingyi, finally found a chance to breathe. Panting, he put away the Zanlu sword and said. "Xiao Zhong said yesterday that he wanted to give something to Mr. Su, so he should go to Mr. Su." Ah! When Zhongli Jiju heard this, she suddenly panicked and secretly thought that something was wrong. She hurriedly walked out and saw Ning Yuhi slowly returning to the house. The two met at the hanging flower door. Naturally, Ning Yuhi's expression was not very good, and he snorted lightly. Zhongli Jiju looked a little strange when he saw Ning Yuhi, but at this time, he was too lazy to argue with Ning Yuhi about the mess, so he frowned and asked. He, have you seen Chu Chu? Ning Yuhi didn't want to talk to Zhongli Jiju, but when the other party asked about his apprentice's news, he couldn't just tell him without telling her, so he said casually. I went shopping in the city with your child. What? It's over, it's over. Zhongli Jiju knew her apprentice's temper. She persuaded Chu Chu like that last time. Today, she must have gone to hook up with Su Buling in a daze. If this set Su Buling on fire. Zhongli Jiju didn't care to exchange greetings with Ning Yu, so he took the horses and drove towards the city. Huainan City is very large, with hundreds of thousands of people gathered in it. Finding two people is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Zhongli Jiju released the little sparrow and searched for her apprentice's whereabouts in the sky. After about half an hour, the little sparrow flew back and led her to the place where the camels were parked on the street. Zhongli Jiju asked around and learned from the boat girl that she had gone to Fairy Lake. She rented a small fishing boat and searched for a long time on the lake. Finally, she found the boat parked in the center of the lake with its doors and windows closed. Why close the door in broad daylight? Could it be that Chu Chu has already? Zhongli Jiju's eyes suddenly panicked. He held the boat and quickly came to the vicinity of the painting boat. He jumped onto the deck of the painting boat in one big step and said urgently. No. Come out. In the cabin, Zhongli Chuchu trembled in fright. She must be embarrassed to let her master see her appearance now. She hurriedly knelt down to pick up the skirt thrown on the ground. Su Buling knew that Zhongli Jiju was nearby, but he knew there was nothing he could do. There was water on all sides and he couldn't jump into the lake. He could only act calmly and got up to explain. But Zhongli Jiju obviously couldn't wait, so she pushed open the door and looked up to see her precious apprentice squatting on the ground with no clothes on, looking panicked and hurriedly putting on clothes. Zhongli Jiju's face turned pale, then she became angry, rushed in to protect Zhongli Chuchu, and said angrily to Su Buling. Su Buling, what did you do to Chu Chu? Su Buling looked serious, spread his hands and said, Jiju, don't get me wrong, I didn't do anything, you see my clothes are fine. Zhongli Chuchu's face turned red, she wrapped herself in a large red skirt, and pulled Zhongli Jiju, Master, we didn't do anything, we just danced. Zhongli Jiju looked at it carefully, and Su Buling looked calm and clear, as if he had done nothing, so he turned his eyes to his apprentice. Dancing? When you dance dressed like this, half of your butt is leaking. Master. Zhongli Chuchu's face was a little helpless, and she stared at Zhongli Jiju angrily. She wanted to say, it was you who gave me the idea to dress like this, and it wasn't me who wanted to dress like this. However, this obviously cannot be said in front of Su Buling. Speak up. Zhongli Jiju knew that this was her bad idea, but now the plan had changed. She could no longer bring Chu Chu and Su Buling together, and had no way of explaining it. She could only pull Zhongli Chuchu out and said to Su Buling. Stay away from my apprentice from now on, pervert. The phrase color embryo obviously refers to Su Buling's dare to touch his own master. But Su Buling definitely couldn't hear it, so he was still a little innocent. Jiju, listen to my explanation. I really didn't do anything to her. If you don't believe me, just ask Chuchu. If there is a lie, I won't, or anything like that in the future. Zhongli Chuchu was pulled out, feeling confused. She finally managed to let Su Buling be in such a mess. It was such a pity to leave like this. She complained at the moment. Master, what are you doing here? Mr. Su and I are friends, how can you tell him to stay away from me? Zhongli Jiju couldn't explain it. Anyway, Chu Chu couldn't be allowed to go astray at the moment, otherwise the two of them would become as embarrassed as Ning Yuhi and master and disciple. At the moment, they could only put on the master's airs. Chu Chu, I am your master, and you don't even listen to my words. Friends are just friends, how can anyone dance dressed like this? Zhongli Chu Chu held it in for a long time, but had nothing to say. He turned back and glanced at Su Buling, who was standing at the door, then reluctantly followed Zhongli Juju and jumped onto the small fishing boat. Su Buling stood on the empty boat and thought about it for a long time. He didn't understand what the situation was, so he had to laugh. Turning around and walking into the cabin, he suddenly felt something was wrong. He could only row a small fishing boat, but not a boat. Hey! Juju, Chuchu, wait. How can I go back if you leave? The lake is so vast that the small fishing boat disappears in the blink of an eye. Su Buling opened his mouth, thought for a moment, and could only mutter one sentence secretly. Okay, you can practice floating on the water. Thank you Laod for the great reward. In the unlikely event that the debt seems to be repaid, I can only pay it off slowly. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 479. In ancient times, only Chu and Qin were good at fighting. Compared with the heroic folk customs of the 800 Li Qinchuan, the Chu land in the heart of the Central Plains has a bit more scholarly air. To put it simply, it may be the difference between a swordsman and a swordsman. Ezhu City on the south bank of the Yangtze River is quietly lying under the sky. It does not have the desolation and wildness of the northwest, nor the small bridges and flowing waters and winding corridors of the Jiangnan water town. It is between the two, and the integration of literature and martial arts is just right. The wind and snow sprinkled on the heavy and majestic long street. Mei Kushan rode a yellow pony with a bamboo book box on his back. Next to the box, there was still a long sword wrapped in black cloth. He walked through the bustling streets, just like a scholar who was traveling and studying in Ezhu. Green bamboo plum wine, leisurely with Kushan. Mei Kushan's reputation before was no less than that of Su Buling, who is now in the limelight. However, since Su Buling became famous all over the world, Mei Kushan seemed to have disappeared. He disappeared not because Mei Kushan was not strong enough, but because martial arts were just a hobby for him. He was just in his early 20s. Except for the fight in front of the Taiji Hall, he was reading all the time. Strictly speaking, he was a scholar, and secondly a knight-errant. He did not value false reputation and had no intention of competing for it. The old master of Yuelu Mountain originally planned to teach 8 successors, Qin, chess, calligraphy and painting, swords, spears, and halberds. Unfortunately, the old master's vision was too high, and his mind was focused on the 2 words world. He did not pay much attention to the teaching of the younger generation. He always had the attitude of learning is fate, and not learning is also fate. He did not say it a second time, which was almost the same as letting it go. At this point, 2 of the Qin, chess, calligraphy and painting died, and 2 of the swords, spears, and halberds were missing. Strictly speaking, they were not complete. Mei Kushan is the sword among them, and he is not very interested in practicing sword. He loves to travel mountains and rivers and explore the past and present. According to Mei Kushan's understanding, the old master originally wanted to teach Su Buling as a spear, but he found that he was not using his talent well, so he changed his mind and decided to use Su Buling as a spear. Being a spear is not a derogatory term. After all, on the big chessboard of the world, those who can be used as a spear to sweep across the world are definitely not ordinary chess pieces. However, before using the spear, the venue must be arranged first, otherwise the ground will be full of dead branches and rotten wood, and no matter how good the spear is, it will not be able to be used. The purpose of Meikushin's coming to Ezhu city is to help the master bring a message, so that another key piece on the chessboard can be the vanguard and clean up the venue first. Tap tap tap. The cold wind blew the king's flag, and the horse stopped in front of the dismounting monument outside the Chu palace. Meikushin came to the patrolling soldiers with his book box on his back, explained his purpose in a polite manner, and then stood on the street and waited quietly. In a moment, the housekeeper of the king of Chu appeared in front of him. After several inquiries, he confirmed that it was Meikushin, and took him to the side door and entered the palace from a secluded place. The palace of the king of Chu was built along the river, surrounded by mountains and rivers, and the eaves of the buildings were endless. Meikushin passed through several porches and saw the king of Chu Song Zhangping in the garden behind the palace. The king of Chu Song Zhangping had sword eyebrows and hooked nose, tall figure and slender limbs, and was about the same age as Songji. He was a handsome man in his prime. The old king of Chu was the second son of Emperor Xiaozong. He could place his fief in the rich Chu land, and he also had heavy troops in his hands to jointly defend against northern Qi with Chang'an. It can be seen how much Emperor Xiaozong trusted the old king of Chu. However, the most ruthless imperial family, brothers and biological fathers and sons can use swords against each other. After 2 generations, it is hard to say what will happen. Meikushin came to the garden, and King Song Zhangping of Chu was practicing swordplay. He was not wearing a python robe, but just an ordinary martial arts uniform. The Chu people love swordplay, and Song Zhangping, who grew up in Chu since childhood, is no exception. His movements are graceful and his swordplay is sophisticated. If he was not in the back garden of the vassal king, no one would doubt that he is a knight in the martial arts world. Song Zhangping learned swordplay from Chen Daozai, the Wudang god of killing, and also consulted with the Cao family and other famous sword-learning families. His martial arts are probably unmatched among the 7 vassal kings, and he is not a mediocre person in the martial arts world. However, in Meikushin's eyes, it was a bit of a show-off. Meikushin carried a bookcase and stood quietly in the corridor to watch, with a lukewarm expression. The one who fed Song Zhangping the moves was Ding Yuan, the first swordsman under the king of Chu. Ding Yuan's position was similar to Yuzhulu of the Suk Palace. He was the first fighter under the vassal king. His father was the coach of the former Deqi Imperial Boxing Hall, and he also had the hereditary title of Wuhe. After Chang'an was captured, the Ding family defended the city to the death to protect the last Qi emperor from escaping Chang'an, and almost all of the family members died. Later, the old king of Chu valued the talent and pleaded with Emperor Xiaozong, and only then did the orphan of the Ding family, who should have been executed, survive. Because the king of Chu did not move around much, Ding Yuan rarely took action. However, when the Iron Eagle was hunting the deer, the ghost lady in her prime ran away to assassinate the king of Chu. At that time, only Ding Yuan and Chen Daozai, the guards, were not injured. Their martial arts must have been very good. Ding ding dang dang. About half a quarter of an hour later, the king of Chu put away the sword in his hand, took the handkerchief from the maid, wiped the sweat on his forehead, and walked towards Meikushin. He looked elegant and easygoing, without the slightest airs of a vassal king. He was more like a confidant who met by chance in the martial arts world, and smiled cheerfully. "Mr. Mei, you are so honorable, I didn't go out to greet you, I am negligent. I heard that Mr. Mei's swordsmanship is unparalleled in the world. I wonder if the set of Tai Chi swordsmanship I just used can please Mr. Mei." Being treated so politely was naturally because of the old man behind Meikushin. Meikushin's words were not arrogant, he just raised his hand gently. "It's pleasing to the eye." Ha ha. Song Zhangping knew himself well, nodded and chuckled, and didn't talk about swordsmanship anymore. He took Meikushin to walk in the garden and asked, "Mr. Mei passed through Ezhu city, is he going back to Yuelu mountain, or just coming out?" Mei Kushan walked side by side, took out a letter from his arms, and smiled. I just came out of Yuelu mountain and happened to pass by as Hu. The master asked me to run errands to deliver a letter to the prince. Song Zhengping glanced at the envelope, took it and looked at the seal, dismissed the people around him, opened it and glanced at it. There were only a few numbers on the letter paper, but the weight of each word was extremely heavy, which made Song Zhengping, who was still calm just now, stop subconsciously and read it carefully for a moment. Song Siming, Bodhi Island, Taiyuan. Mei Kushan did not go up, but stood behind to keep a distance and wait quietly. Song Zhengping finished reading the letter carefully, frowned, looked towards Chang'an, and was silent for a moment before frowning and saying, "This news is a bit far-fetched, how can I believe it?" Mei Kushan smiled calmly and shook his head. "I am just running errands, I don't know what is written in the letter, sir, you are well informed, you know a lot of gossip, it's hard to tell the truth from the false, whether to believe it or not, what to do, all depends on your own opinion." Song Zhengping looked at the letter in his hand, after a long time, raised his hand to tear the paper into pieces, threw it into the pond, and shook his head. "Mr. Mei, please go back, this kind of thing is more suitable for the current emperor." Seeing this, Mei Kushan didn't say much. After paying a salute, he turned around and left the garden. Song Zhengping stood with his hands behind his back and frowned, and waited for Mei Kushan to leave before looking down at the scraps of paper that were gradually sinking into the water. After considering for a long time, he still summoned the counselors. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 480. In the courtyard of Xiajiazhuang, Lu Hongluan brought a tray with steaming ginger soup to the side room. Su Buling sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, with his hair hanging down. He was still thinking about Zhongli Chuchu dancing and Jeju catching an adulterer. After thinking about it, he felt like he had been jumped by an immortal, but the immortal dance must have involved extorting something. What's going on if you just leave like that? After returning to the house, I originally wanted to talk to Zhongli's master and apprentice about this matter, but Zhongli Jeju took Chuchu and ran away to who knows where, and there was no chance to talk to Zhongli Jeju. A woman's heart is like a needle in the sea. Su Buring couldn't figure out what Zhongli's master and apprentice were up to, so he had to put it aside for the time being. Lu Hongluan entered the room, put the ginger soup on the small table, took a dry towel, sat in front of him, continued to wipe Su Buling's hair, frowned and said, "Ling could it be that you took a wild bath again?" Su Buletinling's expression was slightly embarrassed. He sat down and let his aunt wipe his hair, and chuckled. "Well, it's not easy to come to Huainan. The scenery of Fairy Lake is beautiful. It would be a pity not to take a swim. You are 20 years old, and you are not a little kid of several years old. Even a little kid should go to the lake to play in the summer. How can you go to take a bath in the winter? Just wash it? You can do it anyway. Take off your clothes. If you take off your clothes, you will be seen naked. What are you afraid of as a man? If a girl sees you, you will take advantage." The topic becomes more and more crooked. Su Buling picked up the ginger soup and took a sip. After thinking about it, he put Lu Hongluan on his lap and sat with his hands around his waist. "Aunt Lu, how about I tell Xiao Qi to divorce you and come in together after we return to Suzhou?" Lu Hongluan's face turned red, and she glanced around a few times with the comb in her hand. Then she sat on Su Buling's lap with some restraint, continued to comb her hair, and said softly, "Don't talk nonsense. I am the legitimate daughter of the Jinling Lu family. Marrying into the Xiao family affects the relationship between the two families. If I am divorced, how will I explain it to my family? There must be a reason for divorce, right?" "Reason?" Su Buling thought for a moment, then raised his hand and pinched Lu Hongluan's bulging skirt. "Is this okay?" Lu Hongluan trembled slightly, spat slightly, and opened Su Buling's hand. Impossible, if you divorce me for unruly reasons, wouldn't you force me to jump into a well? How about just breaking off the engagement and remarrying? Remarriage. Lu Hongluan's mature and beautiful cheeks showed a bit of confusion. After hesitating for a long time, she still shook her head. Forget it, that's it. I'll just stay with you in private. I don't want any status. Su Buletinling felt itchy at being teased by her fragrant aunt. He raised his hand to pick her chin and said seriously. It's not enough to just muddle along like this. If we don't have the name of husband and wife, we have to have the reality of being husband and wife, right? The reality of a couple? Lu Hongluan's face turned red, she turned her face away and continued combing her hair, saying softly, Your Majesty, I'm not in a hurry, don't force me, it's not sweet to force yourself. Su Buling shrugged slightly and wanted to reply, it's better to twist it than to eat nothing, but he was afraid of being beaten, so he didn't say it. After drinking a bowl of ginger soup, putting on clean clothes and chatting with Lu Hongluan, Su Buling suddenly ran in from the outer house and knocked on the door. Sir, Su Danking is here. Su Danking. When Lu Hongluan heard the name, he was stunned for a moment, and his eyes lit up. He wanted to get up and go to the dressing table to look for jewelry, but he was afraid that Su Buling would see what he was thinking, so he gave it up and said softly, Why did Su Danking come to Xiao's house? Aren't you afraid of being kidnapped again? Su Buling felt a little strange, so he got up and followed Nightingale outside the mansion. It was already afternoon, and under the archway at Zhuangkao, several elders of the Xiao family were greeting Su Danking, who was dressed as a scholar and holding a black oil paper umbrella. When Song Yufu heard the news, she had already run out of the door. She was wearing a goose yellow skirt and was looking at the door on tiptoes. Su Buring raised his hand and pinched Song Yufu's face. Let's go, why are you standing here? Song Yufu didn't know her uncle from the Xiao family, so she was too embarrassed to go there. After seeing Su Buling, she pursed her lips and smiled, then walked past. She thought about it on the way and said softly. Master Su, Chu Chu's master seems to have a grudge against my uncle. When Chu Chu and the others come back later, they won't fight with Uncle Su, right? Su Buling knew that Zhongli Jiju had been tricked by Su Danking back then and had been looking for Su Danking's whereabouts. If he found Su Danking coming over, he would definitely turn into a monster. He chuckled at this and said. Your uncle will always be beaten and won't start a fight. Song Yufu gave Su Buling an angry look, but did not refute the words. Arriving at Zhuangkao, Su Danking showed a warm smile on his face, stepped forward and nodded slightly. Prince Su, Yufu, why are you out here? I was just going to visit you. Su Buling raised his hand in a junior salute and said with a chuckle, Mr. Su, you're welcome. When I come to Huainan this time, are you here to paint beauties? There are a lot of beauties in Zhuangzi. It seems that Mr. Su won't be able to leave for a while. Su Danking came forward, with a look of helplessness on his face. He shook his head and said, Nowadays, the women in the world are too fierce. After we left the capital, I hid in Daoedong. I couldn't draw the beauty, so I was almost beaten by several people. The female leader of a bandit village was taken as a son-in-law, and I don't know if I can finish painting 8 beauties in my lifetime. I recently passed through Jiangnan and heard that Yu Fu was here, so I stopped by to have a look. Su Buling naturally expressed deep sympathy for this, shook his head and chuckled, If you are in trouble, sir, I will recommend a few to you. You can just finish the painting at once and call it a day, so that other women will not worry about it. When Su Danking heard this, he did not refuse, but sighed softly, a big tree attracts the wind, and an ordinary woman becomes the 8 leaders. Except for a little fame, it does a lot of harm but no good. Some women are not that I don't want to paint, but that I can't paint them because they don't have family backgrounds supported by the background. Becoming the eighth leader is either a disaster for oneself or for others. Song Yufu was rejected for this reason. At this time, she was walking in front of Su Buling, a little unconvinced. Then why did Uncle Master paint Miss Chu Chu? Su Danking smiled and said, Zhongli Chu Chu is a girl who doesn't like men, nor is she complacent about her appearance. She always hides her face when going out. Being a bagui is no different from before. Most of the women I painted before were like this. She doesn't care about her face at all, except, of course, Xiao Xiang and Zhongli Juju. In fact, she deserves to be the bagui, but this reputation has given her, God knows whether she will become Daji, Bayasi, so I can't draw. Su Buling knew that Zhongli Juju must have been weird and mischievous when he was young, and it was normal for him to leave such an impression on Su Danking. However, after being in contact with her for a long time, he found that Zhongli Juju was just a little naughty, and there was nothing wrong with his character. Very fun. After all, Bakui is just a false name. Becoming Bakui will not make a woman with poor appearance beautiful, and failing to become Bakui will not make a beautiful woman look ugly. Su Buling had no intention of forcing Su Danking to paint all the girls in the family. After being polite to Su Danking, he sent her to live in the residence where the Xiao family entertained guests.